Hey everybody! Today we're going to learn how to exclude databases from backup based off of size. So this came from a user request online, and I thought I'd shoot out a film here real quick because it's a really easy thing to do. Now, as with anything in Minion Backup, there's more than one way to do this. I think I'm showing you the path of least resistance here. So really, we've got to understand a couple concepts first. First, let's talk about the settings server table. So when I'm here, you see I've got my backup row for full and daily, and I've got it able to run from 7 a.m. to 11:30 p.m., and that's specifically for this test. You'd never do something like that. But in here, you've got two columns that we're interested in. The first one here is exclude, and you notice how we're excluding the DB group Avamar excludes because that's the specific situation that we're talking about here. And two, we're talking about the batch precode, which we're going to call exclude DBs. And I'm going to talk about both of these. So the exact thing that we're trying to do here is they've got a third-party application that is taking backups of SQL that are over a certain size. So what they need to do is say if the database is over, say, 100 gigs, then don't take a SQL backup. Let Avamar take care of it, and anything under 100 gigs, let SQL take care of it. So we're trying to exclude any databases that are over 100 gigs. So along with that, we also have to look at the DB groups table. So let me get out of here. Actually, let me go into here, I think. There we go. So if I look in Minion DB groups, I've got a number of columns here. First is action. That action is either going to be include or exclude. The maintenance type is which module you're on. Here we're going to put backup. The group name, that can be anything you want, but in our case, it's going to match the Avamar excludes that we've put in here. The group def, that's the group definition. That can be any wildcard databases, so you can say db% or %ava%, right? Or you can give just a single database name if you want to. The escape, that's going to be the escape character. Most of the time you're not going to need that, but in case this group definition over here has a special character in there and you need to use a different escape character, then you can do that. And whether or not this row is active, and then a comment just for you. So this is going to be a lot easier to see once we start getting this table populated. So let's go ahead and take a look at, now we've got both of these two put together, right? We've got the settings server table and we've got the DB groups explained. Let's go ahead and start finding out the database sizes. So for this, I've got a simple cursor. Nothing really big about this. I've got some variables up here, and I've put the group name and the size threshold in variables up here. So I've got Avamar excludes, and then the size threshold, this is going to be in gigs, right? I'll go ahead and put that. There we go, just like that, except maybe I could put an actual comment in there. There we go. So I'm setting these guys right here. Inside the cursor, I'm pulling all the databases that aren't system databases, so I'm getting all the user databases. And for each one of these databases, I am going to call dbmate dbSizeGet. Now that is the SP that we use inside Minion Backup to calculate the size of the database. So this is just a really easy thing for you to do. It's a lot easier for you to call this because we've already done all of that math and all of the querying for you, right? So you need to pass it a module name, that's going to be backup. You need to pass it a backup type, that's the full. We're interested in the current database, and we've got the DB size here as an output parameter that it's going to return to us. So for right now, we just want to select the current database and the size. Let's go ahead and do that. And you can see I'm getting one for some of these, 1.53. Let me come over here. There's a 1.54 right there. Here's a 4.89 for old. Beautiful. So we've got a few of these guys. Here's a 2.45, right? So we've got some of these. Most of these are 1 gig, but we got some of them that are a little bit higher, right? So we want to exclude these guys, any of them that's greater than a gig. That's what I have set right here, right? Anything greater than a gig, we want to exclude. So here's what we do. We've got this set of if statements here. Let me open up this first one. So if the database size is greater than the threshold, so if it's greater than 1 gig, if there's not already a row in dbmake groups where the action is exclude and it's a backup, and the group name equals the group name at the top, and the group def equals the current database, and it's active, right? So all of the criteria we need to check for. So in other words, if this current database doesn't have an active exclude row for this specific group, for this specific group name, then I want you to insert it. So all we're going to do is insert exclude backup, the group name we defined at the top, the current database. This is that escape character. I want to set it to active, and I want to give it a comment of exclude for Avamar. Does that say Avamar or Avatar? That says Avamar. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this portion of it now. And let's take a look at what's in that table already. It should be empty. There we go, it's empty. So now if I run this guy, I get my reporting done. You can see it only takes 4 seconds for this to run. That's not too bad. There we go. Now I get 9 exclusions. So every one of these guys are set up as an action to exclude for backups. Then they're in the same group, and here is the name of the specific database. Now you can't really use wildcards in here because they're all different, right? So we're going to put specific database names in here. So since they all have the same group name and they're all set up to exclude, whenever Minion runs, it's going to look at these and it's going to say, oh, wait a minute, you wanted to exclude everything in this exclude group. There's your exclude, there's your group. And that's where that comes from. So when we go back to the settings server table, you can see that I'm defining as an exclude right here the DB group colon. That's the moniker that tells it that it's coming from that table. Avamar excludes. Here it is. Avamar excludes. So you see? Now all I got to do is manage this. So what if a database drops in size, right? What if it's that size that we want it to be, right? It goes over, say, that 100 gig threshold or something, but then a huge purge happens and it drops down to like 35 gigs. So we're going to need to back it up now, right? So we'll put in this piece of it right here that says if it's less than or equal to the threshold size, then delete it from that table where it equals exclude and backup and Avamar includes. And I actually probably, not even probably, I forgot to do this. There we go. And we're the current, where it's the current database and it's active. Now you could easily just update it and flip the active bit to off and just keep it there for next time it goes up and then flip it back on, right? This is just an example of how you would do this kind of thing. There's probably a couple more small elements I would put in here to make it absolutely perfect. But, you know, you can either delete it or you can set it to inactive. And then when it goes over again, you can test. If it's there and it's inactive, then flip it on. If not, then you can include it. So you could do something like that, right, and manage it that way. So, okay, now that I've got this, I need to turn it into an SP. So I've already got this SP written, and I'm calling it Exclude DBs. Weird, huh? Let's go ahead and turn off the select here. There we go. So now I'm going to alter this SP. There we go. And since I called it Exclude DBs, over here in my settings server table for this row, that's the batch precode I want to run. I want to run that SP exclude DBs. Get it? So there you go. Now I have my group defined, and I've got my SP defined that's going to manage the members of that group. So now the whole thing is completely dynamic. As new DBs get brought onto the system, they're going to be put in, they're going to be managed this way as well. If they're over that size threshold, then they'll be put in the table. As they fall out under that size threshold, they'll be taken out of the table. So this group right here will be managed dynamically, right? Okay. And as a matter of fact, I can even show you that. Let me think. Is it here? Was I? Okay. So right now I've got 9 of these guys. Right there. There we go. So let's take this out of the SP for now. And let's just play with this. Let's change this to 2. Let's see how many we get if we run this as 2. There we go. Now, as I come up here, you can see that I've got my 9. Yeah, right. I looked at this 9 and said, okay, we've got 9, but I've got 6 now, right? And I had 9 before. So I managed to take away 3, right? Let me show you. Let's take this back to 1. And let's run this again. There we go. Now let's do that. You see now I've got 9 again. So I'm losing 3 when I do that. If I change this to 2.5, let's just 2.5. Let's change that to 2.5 and run it again. There we go. Now I've only got 5. So you can see I'm dynamically able to manage this as I raise and lower the criteria, right? So it's definitely working. Let's change this back to 1.0. There we go. Let's run that one more time. And I'm back to my 9. And you see that it's AdventureWorks and it's Minion Dev, right? Okay. So now let's come back here and let's put this back into the SP like it's supposed to. So I'll highlight all that and I'll turn on the SP. There we go. So I've got my SP created and it's in the database that Minion is in, right? If you want to put it in a different database, then you'd have to preface it. You'd have to use a 3-point naming convention here. So okay, I've got my group that's being dynamically managed. I've got my SP that's going to be called. Now, when I call this manually, now I can call this with statement only right here, and I can check it out, right? So I'm going to call this with an exclude of DB group Avamar excludes. And when I do that, I'm going to get a list of everybody that's going to be run. You can see the statements are printed right here. But one of the things you notice that's not here is AdventureWorks. That was one of the ones that was in the list, right? So let's spot check this a little bit. AdventureWorks, Minion Dev. Okay. So AdventureWorks isn't here. Minion Dev isn't here. So it looks like it's working. Cool. So let's go ahead and run a backup and make sure that that's going to work the way we want it to. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to truncate this. And then I'm going to truncate the log table. There we go. So in order to run a backup from the settings server table, the backup type has to be null. Okay? And it's going to pick the next one. It's going to pick the next backup type. So you see here I've got max for time frame. This is the one I'm interested in right here. Is this guy. So I've got max for time frame is 1, and I've already backed up 1, so I've already reached my max, so I have to reset this to 0. So what this says is I want you to run a full backup between 7 and 11:30, but I want you to only be able to run 1 for that time frame. So this has to be less than this if you want it to run. So now when I run this, I can just run Minion Backup Master and it'll run from the table. So I don't have to type in a user type full or anything, or I don't have to type in DB type user or backup type full. Just run this and it'll pick up the right schedule. So now as I do that, there we go. Let's take a look at what's running. There we go, we've got some stuff running. And it'll really only take a minute or so for this to run. So I'm going to pause this and I'll come back when it's finished. Okay, it finished. And you can see here the databases that were run. Again, you can see that AdventureWorks is missing, and so is Minion Dev. It would be right after this one. And we can also go check. Actually, let me come down. Let me come here. We can also go check the log table as well. And you can see that that database is missing, and so is Minion Dev, wherever it is. There we go. It would be right there. It would be between these two. So, there you go. That is how to dynamically exclude databases using database groups based off of database size. And of course, you can use this exact same thing for anything, right? You could take this exact same code and you could exclude, you could manage that exclusion list based off of anything. You can manage an include list based off of anything you want. So there you go. That's the power that you can get into when you start doing stuff with Minion Backup.